to have Dr. Kotwal, who and Dr. Russell, who will be saying a few words. Dr. Kotwal is from the University of California at San Francisco School of Medicine. He is an attending physician in the Division of Geriatrics at University of California, UCSF Medical Center, and he's an assistant professor of medicine. He completed his undergraduate training in anthropology at Northwestern University and his medical training at the University of Chicago. And he also did his training at the Brigham and Women's Hospital here in Boston and his clinical fellowship in geriatrics and palliative care at UCSF. Dr. Kotwal co-leads the Social Connections in Aging Lab at UCSF and conducts research funded by the National Institute on Aging to examine the health effects of loneliness and social isolation among older adults and how prioritizing social connection can improve health and well-being. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Kotwal. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Susan, for the intro. And I'm really excited to be here to speak with you all today. I'm thinking back to my fond memories of the snowpocalypse in Boston back when I trained a few years ago. Sending you all warm thoughts from out here in California. All right, so I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started for today. Um, so And thank you, Dr. Russell, for my title for my presentation today. Don't be out in the cold seeking social connection. Today, I'm going to give a brief overview of this topic. Obviously, I could talk for days about this topic since it's the area that I focus my research on, but I really want to provide an overview and some tips for how to prioritize social connection in the context of your health as we approach the holiday season and the coming year. So here are my disclosures. I do private consulting for one company called Papa Health, which is not relevant to today's discussion. And here are my funders, the National Institute on Aging, the California Department of Public Health, and the National Palliative Care Research Center. Anything I discuss today does not represent their views. Okay, so the topics of loneliness and social isolation have received a lot of attention in the media. Here are a collection of headlines from up to a decade ago, where loneliness was described as deadly, deadlier than obesity or smoking cigarettes, as an epidemic. The UK and Japan actually developed ministers of loneliness because they worried about the health effects of these concepts. And clearly, people really care about these topics and how it impacts health. If you scan your favorite newspaper over the last month or so, there are probably 2 or 3 articles about this topic detailing its connection to health. Now, I became interested in these topics when I was going through my geriatrics fellowship training. I was noticing that we were learning about many different dimensions of people's health, many different priorities that people might have as they're aging. And I noticed that oftentimes we forget about these topics of loneliness and isolation and how deeply they can impact our health. I wondered about how we might be able to prioritize these needs, just as we prioritize things like pain or shortness of breath, and how we can build these priorities into our health system. Part of the challenge with understanding how to address these needs just comes down to definitions. And so here is how I think about these 2 different concepts of loneliness and social isolation. They are related but distinct concepts, which describe the overall health of our social lives. Loneliness is a subjective assessment that our social relationships are lacking. So this is how you feel, right? Do you feel like you lack companionship? Do you feel isolated from others or like you don't belong in your community? Loneliness is something that you can feel even when you're surrounded by others. So a popular phrase is, you can feel lonely in a crowded room. On the other hand, is social isolation. This refers to an objective deficit in the connections that you have to family, friends, or the community. So you can actually tally up how many friends and family members do you have? How often are you going to your religious service or participating in community activities? When people have very few relationships or contact with others, they're considered to be socially isolated. These um, concepts are related but distinct, as represented in this Venn diagram. So actually, when we do research on these topics, very few people meet criteria for both, but they both have similar effects on our health. So let's think a little bit about loneliness. So again, here's the definition. Loneliness is that subjective feeling of being alone. You can feel lonely in a crowded room. And when we look at how common it is across the lifespan, it's actually quite common. So here on the left-hand side is the frequency of it happening across the lifespan. You can see that it's fairly, some curves here and there, but it's fairly flat. There's a peak in middle ages, and then after age 70, it can become more common. This is data that was taken from right around the start of the pandemic. But more recently, we've actually found that loneliness is becoming more common in people in their adolescence or early or 20s and early 30s. When we do national surveys, we found that about 40% of people over age 60 report that they're lonely, at least occasionally. And about 10% of people, so 1 in 10 people, report that they are frequently lonely. When I think about loneliness, we recognize that it is not a disease. It's not a medical condition, but it is more than just a bad feeling. So so why is loneliness bad for our health? Well, it's not a disease, but evolutionary psychologists will argue that loneliness is a signal that our social relationships are inadequate. Evolution has led us to perceive that this lack of social connection can actually threaten our survival. So think about it. If in prehistoric ages, if you were out there gathering berries or putting together your sandwich to eat, your daily lunch, if you were alone, you might not be able to look out for potential predators like a saber-toothed tiger and eat at the same time. So, in other words, the longer we feel lonely, the longer we're in this chronic state of stress and this chronic state of perceiving a threat from our external environment. And that can lead to changes in our sleep, our immune system, and a general state of stress that can lead to chronic inflammation. Some of the strongest evidence ties this chronic stress to poor sleep, which of course has a number of downstream consequences. Other mechanisms include inflammatory markers or changes in our immune system. And then, similar to other psychological conditions, people who are chronically lonely can also change their health behaviors, leading them to withdraw further. So let's now turn to social isolation. Now, this refers to a complete or near complete lack of contact with society. So people who have few to no relationships or contact with others. A question that I often use to determine whether somebody is isolated is looking back over the last year, who are the people you talked with most often about important things? If someone has trouble mentioning anybody who they were able to talk to important things about, they may be socially isolated. When we do large national surveys, we found that social isolation is surprisingly common among people over age 60. About 1 in 5 of these individuals meet criteria for social isolation, meaning they may live alone, they're unmarried, they have few relatives living close by, they have little contact with family, friends, or relatives, and they have little engagement with their community activities around them. Why is this bad for our health? Well, one major study found that social connection or the lack of social connection was just as strongly tied to health as other leading health behaviors like smoking, physical activity, and even things like alcohol use. So, this study, shown in these bar graphs, found that social connection was strongly related to reduced mortality or a longer lifespan. And this was the bars represent how strong this association was. And it was just as strong or stronger than things like smoking half a pack of cigarettes, alcohol use, the flu vaccine, physical activity, or air pollution. That's all the way here on the bottom. And this received a lot of attention from the Surgeon General when this was first released back in 2017. And as a consequence, the Surgeon General actually raised this to be one of the most important issues affecting our society's health. Why is this happening? I think of social connection as kind of a health behavior. When you're more socially active, people tend to be healthier. They tend to go out for more physical activity. They tend to be happier, less depressed, less anxious. And they tend to be able to manage complicated medical conditions more easily. Like, let's say you have to go to your medical appointments multiple times a week. You need people to help get you there if you're quite sick. And in times of crisis, social connection can help get people through, right? It can help people recover from surgery, help people get necessary caregivers, or if people are feeling anxious or depressed, it can just help to have a listening ear. One point I wanted to make here is that loneliness and social isolation are not unique to older ages. This is something that can occur and commonly occurs throughout people's lifespan. But there are unique considerations at this life stage, just like there are at every life stage. And some of the things that I've noticed in my clinical practice is that older age can come along with many challenging social changes. The death of a spouse, the death or loss of other relatives or friends, changes in living arrangements, or moving from one's home that people have lived in for decades, or institutionalization. There's also, of course, health changes that can occur, including deteriorating physical health, changes in mobility, sensory impairment like vision or hearing changes, and reduced opportunities for social activities, all of which can make a big difference in people's social lives. And what we found is that when people experience these changes to their social life, and it persists over many years or even decades, it can greatly impact health. Just to summarize some of the health effects that have been found in research, people with active social lives tend to have longer lifespans. They tend to live independently longer, so they have preserved strength and they're more likely to remain in their homes. And they also have better quality of life, so less pain, less depression or fatigue, better sleep, fewer medications, and preserved memory. Okay, so now that I've discussed some of the key definitions and health effects, let's turn now to what we can do to address these needs. Overall, this is a major topic of national conversation. In May of 2023, the Surgeon General released a Surgeon General's advisory report called Our Epidemic of Loneliness and Isolation. In this report, the Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, called for cross-sector collaboration to address these needs, recognizing that this is a complex societal challenge that our country is facing. He called for 6 different sectors to address this need. The first is strengthening local social infrastructure in local communities, enacting pro-connection public policies, mobilizing the health sector, reforming digital environments, deepening our knowledge, just like we're doing right now, and building a culture of connection. Now, this can seem like a major task, and so I want to leave you all with some really concrete, actionable steps that you all can take in your daily life to address this. So the first step that I do in my personal life or in my clinical practice is just start a conversation. These topics are heavily stigmatized. People have a hard time discussing loneliness or their need for social connection. One of our community partners likes to put it this way. He says, when I think about social connection, I nobody likes to say, "Hey, I'm Ashwin. I have no friends," right? It can be a really hard topic to discuss. So I try to normalize these topics because, in all honesty, it's quite common for people to have experienced these in their lifetime. So I use phrases like, a lot of people have been feeling lonely recently. Is that something you've experienced? Or do you need help connecting with others? Try these words out, make them your own, and practice, sharing this with your family or friends. If people do mention that they're lonely or that they need help connecting with others, the second step is just creating some safe space to discuss these topics that can be highly emotionally charged. Recognizing that people are in need. Thank you for sharing this. It sounds like you've been going through a lot recently. Is that something that I can help with? And then inviting some brainstorming of potential solutions. What do you think would help right now? Um, this is something that's helped me when I felt lonely. Do you think that you'd be interested in something like this? Sometimes people actually don't want a solution to something. They just want some space to discuss. I've had many people in my clinic or even in my family who've said, you know, I don't know if what will help right now, but I appreciate you talking to me about this. So it's okay not to have a clear solution, but to show people that this is it's important to prioritize and it's important for people to share. The third step is to think about available solutions. Now, some of the things may be very relevant to discuss with your clinical team. Some of the factors that can strongly be associated with loneliness or isolation are things like vision or hearing impairment, functionally needs, so changes in people's mobility, their ability to get around their home, their ability to take care of themselves. Those can also impact people's social life. Uncontrolled pain, and actually, incontinence is one of the strongest risk factors for loneliness and isolation because people just feel uncomfortable getting out of their home or can feel embarrassed in social situations. All of these factors are quite addressable in our clinics. And so, can be addressed with social goals in mind. The second is to be aware of programs in our community that directly are, are in place to directly enhance our social lives. Now, last time I gave a talk to this group about 3 years ago, I want to say, many people in the group had great ideas around social programs available in their community. And some of those are listed here. They included peer support, telephone-based support, like the Institute on Aging Friendship Line, group-based programs like exercise, um, long-term learning, gardening classes. I remember receiving recommendations for Bridge Base, which is a place to play bridge online, Ageless Grace, which is a movement class. There's many intergenerational opportunities to share knowledge across generations, working with a therapist or a psychologist. And I'll just call out this group called End Loneliness Massachusetts. I have a picture from the website here, the Massachusetts Coalition to Build Community and End Loneliness, which has hundreds of members in Massachusetts and the Boston area, all committed to addressing this need. I welcome you to check out that website where they have a lot of nice resources. And finally, technology always comes up whenever I give talks. So just a couple of principles to think about with technology and social connection. So technology can be helpful in enhancing social connection in a way that benefits our health, but it depends on the context. So the way I think about it, it benefits social connections when it complements already deep offline relationships, but it impairs connectedness when it replaces deep offline relationships with superficial online engagement. So we don't want it to be a replacement for meaningful social connection. And lastly, it can enhance connectedness when deep offline engagement is difficult or impossible to attain. And I think about this situation for people who have a really hard time leaving their home, people who might be caregivers or care partners for family members or spouses who have a lot of different responsibilities and have a hard time going to their community activities like they used to. People in who are part of immigrant communities who may not speak English as a first language. And so it's helpful to have kind of remote or Zoom groups. So there are kind of exceptions to this rule, but these are the general principles that I go by. Okay. And the last step here is to advocate for policy change. When I lived in Boston, I remember Boston to be one of the most civic-minded cities that I've ever lived in. And there's just an enormous amount that we can do to promote age-friendly communities in our cities. You know, things like advocating for good public transportation, age-friendly parks and neighborhoods, and advocating for funding for social programs that promote connectedness. These are all things that we can all kind of advocate for and make a difference in our own communities. Okay, so with that, thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to any questions you all have.
Thank you, Dr. Kotwal. That was really, really interesting, and I love the resources you shared. So we've got some questions from a couple of people, and anyone that has a question, please enter it into the chat. The first question is about needing more options for connection, especially for people that may have a mobility impairment, and it may be hard to find somebody that is interested in dating or spending time with someone who uses a rollator. So I'm wondering if you have any suggestions or thoughts about that, or if Dr. Um, Russell does.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm curious what people in the group think about how to um, how to enhance social connection in that situation. My sense is that, you know, being around people who have similar needs or kind of shared lived experiences might be helpful. There's also a lot of sometimes there's a lot of guilt or shame that comes along with new changes in our health. And we can be harder on ourselves than actually what people around us perceive. And so part of it is just kind of putting yourself out there and finding ways to, feel comfortable with that. Often talking with your clinical teams can help with that, but also talking with family and friends to think about what are social situations that I can find, that can be comfortable, that where I can feel myself in. And lastly, there are, I believe, a number of technology apps and other social programs that are out there that promote dating at all times in our life. And so I think there are a few that are specific to the Boston area, but that might be worth checking out too.
Okay. And one question I have for Monique or Dr. Russell or anybody, Emily, in the past, we've shared resources from Senior Planet, and I think they had something related to dating or sexuality or something that was an interesting place on their website. I don't remember the exact name of it, but just a thought.
That's great.
Um,
Yeah,
and
Senior Planet is a phenomenal resource. It was originally out of Cornell, and it really took off during COVID. And they had the reason I've often referred patients to it is because they have Monday through Friday exercise classes that are interactive and they're Zoom based. And in New England, as I'm sure you all know, doctor, I like to exercise, but only when the weather is good. So I'm like, well, we need a plan B. And that's been very helpful. And they do have non-exercise based classes as well. And uh, it's again, it's owned by AARP now, but I believe everything is free. and I've had very good success with that.
You know, another idea, and this is just kind of a wild idea, but we've also had presentations on the town hall from the Osher Lifelong Learning Center at
Mm-hmm.
UMass in Boston, and they offer courses. I think you pay a fee, but then you can take the courses for free. And that's also a good way to meet other people that you might have shared interests with based on the content of whatever course you might be interested in. And they have pretty broad courses that are available. And I also have learned that many colleges that some of us, may have attended also do that and offer those programs to alumni. So another question is, someone asked if we could please show the list of solutions again. So I think we could bring that up. And then another person asked about sort of how to deal with concerns about fatigue, and getting out and being with people, which sometimes is tiring. And the person is concerned about worsening fatigue. If you could say something about that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's a really common challenge that people experience and can be a major barrier to, participating actively in one's social life or previously meaningful activities. Um, so the first is fatigue might be a result of active medical conditions. And so, I would encourage you to talk with your clinical teams, your doctor or others about what might be going on there and if there's any ways to address that need. The second is I often think about our energy as kind of we have kind of a well or a pool of energy that we use during the day. And some activities drain our energy far quicker than others. And there are also ways to prioritize certain activities so that you can really direct that limited resource in the most meaningful way possible. And so, I think about it might not be about going to a social activity every day of the week, but maybe once a week there is a particular activity that requires a little bit more energy that you want to prioritize. Or maybe at a certain time of day, you tend to have more energy than at other times of day. So a lot of this is a very personalized approach to how to navigate your fatigue and your energy in order to be active socially. But in general, I would try to be kind to yourself and recognize that, this is a limited resource. And so really try to prioritize or focus on a couple of really meaningful things rather than, a whole host of things.
That's good advice for all of us, especially in the holiday season. So, other questions? Oh, we have a new one. Hang on. Can you comment on the loss of one's driver's license? A family member is struggling with this loss of independence and more isolation. And that's a very real issue, I think, for many people.
Yeah. Yeah, the loss of a driver's license is a really profound change for so many people. And I've noticed that this can sometimes intersect with other um, changes that people have. So, if you live in a rural area and you lose your driver's license, if you're already experiencing things like sensory, like vision or hearing loss, and you've lost your driver's license. So there may be intersecting challenges here that are going on that's important to be aware of. As far as driver's license, I mentioned at the end, the role of technology can sometimes be helpful for people who are unable to leave their home or form deep offline relationships. And so I'd really think about, are there ways that we can bring the social activities to them? The second is, I think it requires more proactive outreach from people surrounding social networks, people to visit them, people to help with transportation, people to call and check in on them. This is something that we did a lot during the pandemic that sometimes has fallen off, but being proactive can really make a difference. And the last is this is also a space where we need to advocate for age-friendly neighborhoods and communities. When people lose a driver's license, um, it's not okay that they no longer have access to all of the things a city has to offer. We need to find ways that we can improve that type of access, improve people's ability to use public transportation, to get, rides, maybe ride sharing programs, or think about, how to make those types of options affordable.
And we have a suggestion in the chat that I think is wonderful, and that's to walk a dog, your own or a
I love it.
friend's. Not too big a dog, but a dog. And that's a fine way to form warm interactions and ongoing friendships. And I know some people that got married because they walked a dog and met a fellow dog lover. So I think that that's a wonderful suggestion. And dogs also are great company as long as they don't get in our way. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
That's great. Yeah, and I also welcome the cat lovers in the group too. Uh, there's a lot of um, I remember one of the veterans in my clinic, he used to say, I don't have too many friends, but my cat greeting me every time I come home is a big part of my happiness. So, th I think pets can be really wonderful companions.
Yeah, yeah, I
I
do
was
too.
just going to, I was just going to pause. I think one of the other concerns that I experience in feedback from a lot of the patients I work with is, some of the activities are one size fits all.
Mhm.
And, we spent our lives differentiating into who we are. And, if someone put me around a table and said, oh, we're going to have a talk about cars and sports, I'd look for the nearest exit because I never really paid attention to either of those things, growing up. And so finding simpatico people can be really challenging as we get older. And I think that's where technology has really been helpful for people getting
Mhm.
these online, whether it's a book club or a reading group or a issues of the day talking group. And, this doesn't have to come from an agency. This doesn't have to come from a hospital. This can be homegrown. And that's what I'm very excited about people doing this. And we were in a small, little town, an old mill town over the weekend, and we stumbled into this coffee shop that had a giant dining room table, and it was just like a little rustic shop. And I said, no, that's like a perfect thing. It doesn't have to be high tech bells and whistles. It can just be a gathering place.
Yeah. And Matt, you just reminded me that I think some of the public libraries have online book clubs,
Hmm.
and they focus on, everything from fiction, nonfiction, mysteries, poetry, pretty much every category of literature you could think of. And those might be worth exploring. And one other just quick little story. Many, many years ago, I used to travel a lot more than I do now. And one time during close to the holidays, I got stuck in Denver because of a snowstorm, and I was really anxious to get home. And the people I was meeting with ended up putting me in a new hotel that was kind of a cool, hip place that just made me feel worse because I really wanted to be with my family. And when I checked in, they asked me if I would like an aquatic companion.
Hmm.
And I'm sort of looking at them going, really? Um, so I just decided, sure, I'll take an aquatic companion. And so I go up to my room, and in a little while, someone knocks on the door, and they bring in a little fish bowl with a goldfish in it. And they put the goldfish on the desk in the room. And I have to admit, that was my best friend for the rest of the night. It was so comforting, and fish are really easy to take care of, and they're also fun to watch. So it's just another idea about a pet that might be a little bit easier than a dog or a cat if you're so inclined. But they're beautiful and they swim around and everything. And I, to this day, I still sort of laugh to myself about how comforting it was to have that fish in the room with me.
That's great. Thank you, Susan, for sharing
You're
that.
welcome.
And I agree, and to build on Dr. Russell's point, different things work for different people. So kind of what I often will tell people is let's try something out, and if it doesn't work, let's revisit this. And sometimes that trial and error approach can help you find what works for you. The other thing I'll mention is I put in the chat another resource that we've used. This is a program called Social Call, which is run by a nonprofit called Front Porch. It's a national program. They pair callers with um, people who want to talk. And they also have things like virtual book clubs and virtual programs that people can be a part of. And what's cool about this program is if you like it, you can actually become a volunteer. So they'll train you to be a part of it and call others. So just something to consider.
Yeah, I think that there's a program like that that I used to be somewhat involved in
Mm.
called Silverline.
Oh,
And
yeah.
in
Mhm.
and they found that many of the people that called ended up becoming volunteers because it was such a wonderful experience. And it's all on the phone. At least it was. I don't know whether this is virtual or on the phone or
I think
both.
this is all on the phone too. Yeah.
Yeah, it was great. Any other questions or comments? Emily, I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add.
I've learned a lot about a few resources myself today, which is great. I do always think that the local council on aging or senior center that exist in every town and city in Massachusetts are an incredible resource, and they're a resource for transportation and many, many other things. Um, but they all vary in terms of what um, social activities, and it's usually a combination of exercise, interest groups, all sorts of things. It's worth taking a look if you haven't already on your town's website for the senior center or go in person. And in most cases, you can if you see something in a town nearby that looks appealing, you can still participate. So it's worth definitely taking advantage of your local senior center if you haven't already.
And for
Great,
those who don't
thank you.
already know, Emily Sterling Graves is our is the social work team member in our office in geriatric medicine. We would be lost without her and her
Oh
knowledge
my,
of
I don't know.
how we can keep people aging well in the community.
Thank you.
All right. Are there any other questions today?
We have a hand raised. I think it says owner. I think you have to unmute yourself.
It was Sharon.
No, not Sharon. It was someone else.
Let's see.
It
Well,
says
Sharon,
owner.
go ahead.
I was just going to say that, you know, just because there are a lot of people on this town hall, there are a lot of adult day health centers, and they have activities. Like my favorite thing is to go to the Haitian adult day health centers, where in one corner there's some preacher like doing the whole preaching thing. In another corner, there's a whole bunch of guys sitting and playing dominoes. In another, there's a bunch of women that are doing a different activity. And so for anybody who knows people who might be interested, and this is specifically around particular, just to be more culturally aware, there are a lot of programs around to do this, but regular adult day health centers often have these kinds of things, and people can go there, they can get breakfast and lunch, and meet new friends. And I think it may not be something for the people on this line, but if you know people who might benefit from those things, they can be very, very helpful getting out of the house during the day, especially if there's nobody at home. And it's very quiet there. I've always loved the boisterous nature of an adult day program.
Thank you. Great to
That's a
see
great
you.
recommendation. And I'll just add that anytime you can have a meal with people around you, I think that's a win. And that's also probably one thing that I hope will get more back to normals, since the pandemic. So yeah, strongly second that recommendation.
Great.
One of the things I found, and is kind of relevant to how we think about loneliness, is just trying to provide space to uh, to allow people to process things in their own time without trying to fix a particular emotion. So ways that I will do that, just provide space and allow people to talk without any judgment,
Mhm.
are things like showing that I respect what they're going through. It sounds like you're going through I you've gone through a lot, and I just want to let you know that I really care about you, or I really deeply respect what you've been going through. Things like just providing understanding or support for people. Sometimes I'll say, I I can't imagine what you've been going through recently, but just know that I'm here to support you. Can sometimes be a non-judgmental way to show that you're there and you're listening to their needs. Uh, I'm curious if other people have thoughts on how to address this.
No.
I was gonna
Emily, you're on
maybe.
mute. Yeah,
Oh,
go
I
ahead.
unmuted myself, but um, partly just acknowledging how, at any age and stage, our relationship with our adult children can be challenging, and navigating how to those relationships and how to communicate. But maybe, since this is a subject about loneliness and social isolation, maybe letting her know that you miss her and you notice a change, and just letting her know that you miss her, and wondering, um, is there a path to connect a little bit more? And um, I'm assuming that does have something. Your mother's instinct is telling her that anyway, but maybe just letting her know too that you notice the change and that you miss her. So something like that.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing that. Well, I wish everyone a wonderful holiday. Stay dry. It looks like it's going to be wet the rest of the week. And we look forward to seeing you in January.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kotwal. That was awesome.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having me. All right, take care,
Happy
everyone.
holidays, everyone.